is, not at chasing some idea of a perfectly just society. In contrast, the transcendental issue is seen as a predominant question in the theory of justice in contemporary political philosophy. In fact, it is sometimes taken to be the only question that deserves patient exploration in that literature. The shared starting point in most of the modern theories of justice is the identification of the demands of quote-unquote a just society and the nature of quote-unquote just institutions. The exercise begins by asking, what is a just society? And related to that, what are the principles on the basis of which just institutions could be set up for the society? Indeed, in most theories of justice in contemporary political philosophy, these questions about impeccably just societies and exactly just institutions occupy the center stage, with little on the periphery. The transcendental approach to justice is, of course, not new. It can be traced at least to the 17th century writings of Thomas Hobbes, including in Leviathan, but recent contributions have done much to consolidate the reliance on this approach. In his investigation of justice as fairness, Rawls explores in depth the nature of an entirely just society seen in the perspective of fairness. Even those political philosophers who have taken a different approach to the demands of justice from Rawls, for example, my friend Robert Nozick, who differs, whom I miss also greatly since he died a few years ago, Nozick, who differs quite radically on the primacy of entitlement and historically founded rights, or another friend, Thomas Nagel, whose differences from Rawls are more subtle. Despite these differences, both tend to accept the transcendental approach to be the only one that can take us towards an understanding of the nature of justice. However, the transcendental identification does not tell us much about how to compare the term in terms of their justice-related characteristic, two arraignments, neither of which actually satisfy the social contract of complete justice. How might we compare, for example, one, the United States today as it is, with its totality of problems, including the present absence of widespread medical insurance, and two, an alternative where the lack of guaranteed medical insurance has been fully remedied without remedying other problems that also exist in the United States. Neither of these alternatives can, of course, be seen as a perfectly just society, but we can hardly take them to be much the same in terms of justice and see them only as belonging to the large Rawlsian box called not just. Nor, to take another example, would it have given Adam Smith or Marco de Condorcet or Mary Wollstonecraft any well-theorized support for their efforts to abolish slavery in the 18th century world without taking on at the same time all the other justice-related infelicities that ail the world they tried to reform. Transcendence is a lumped-together view of the world, with all possible social arrangement seen either as unjust or as just, without further distinction. In contrast, the human development approach and social choice theory, on which the human development approach does draw, explicitly sometimes, but mostly by implication, are firmly tied to asking exclusively comparative questions. How can we advance justice or reduce injustice in the world? Is this contrast significant? I would argue that it certainly is. It may well turn out that in a comparative perspective, the introduction of social policies that eliminate, say, widespread hunger or remove rampant illiteracy can be shown to aid an advancement of justice. But the implementation of such policies could still leave the societies involved far away from the transcendental requirements of a fully just society, which have a great many other demands as well. Can it be argued that the practical concentration on comparative questions, well exemplified by Mahbub's predilection in that direction, is not at all enough for the philosophy of justice, since underlying the comparative question, there must be, at some deeper level, some transcendental understanding of the demands of a perfectly just society. Can it be said that knowing about the nature of a fully just society is necessary for a well-grounded practical reasoning on justice? I think that thesis would be very hard to defend. Indeed, in the discipline of comparative judgments, well illustrated again by social choice theory, but that applies in any field, relative assessment of two alternatives tend in general to be a matter between them, without there being the necessity to beseech the help of a third, irrelevant alternative. Indeed, it is not at all obvious why, in making the judgment that some social arrangement X is better than an alternative arrangement Y, we have to invoke the identification that some quite different alternative Z is the best or exactly the right social arrangement. For example, in arguing for a Picasso over a Dali, we do not need to get steamed up about identifying the perfect picture in the world, which would beat the Picassos and the Dalis flat and all other paintings in the world. We are simply judging a Picasso against a Dali. It might, however, be thought that the analogy with aesthetics is problematic, since a person might not even have any idea of a perfect picture, in a way that the idea of a perfectly just society has appeared to be identifiable, at least in transcendental theories of justice. I will presently argue that the existence of transcendence is actually not guaranteed, even in the field of justice. But let me for the moment proceed on the generous presumption that such an identification can be made, only for the moment. But the possibility of having an identifiably inviolate or best alternative does not indicate that it is necessary or indeed useful to refer to it in judging the relative merits of non-supreme alternatives. For example, we may indeed be willing to accept with great certainty that the Everest is the tallest mountain in the world, completely unbeatable in terms of stature by any peak. But that understanding is neither needed nor particularly helpful in comparing the peak heights of, say, Kilimanjaro and McKinley. There would be something very deeply odd in a general belief that the comparison